Welcome to Beyond the Call podcast, where we tell the stories of those people behind the jobs we rely on. We go into the good, the bad and the ugly, and we shine a light in what can be a dark place. Just a warning, the content can be graphic and distressing, so please use your discretion. Please like and subscribe on your podcast platform and our social media. And if you have feedback, I read every single one. Let's get on to this episode of Beyond the Call. G'day everybody, and welcome back to another episode of Beyond the Call. I'm delighted today that we've got another guest. Lori Hodges is from the big old US of A. And I'm really happy to have her on. She has an extensive history and I'm going to let her tell you all about it. So Lori, welcome to the podcast. Thanks for joining us.
All right. Thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
No worries at all. Let's start from the bottom or the top or whatever you want to call it. Where were you? Tell me about your childhood. Where are you from? What was childhood like?
So I was born and raised in Colorado, and my childhood was in kind of rural Colorado. Growing up, I was in the Civil Air Patrol. I don't know if you know what that is, if anybody knows what that is, but that's an auxiliary of the Air Force. So you start at like 12 years old, you learn to fly, and you do search and rescue. So I kind of at a young age kind of got into emergency services from a very young age. I had kind of a regular family for the beginning of my life, and then my father ended up becoming an alcoholic and a drug addict. So around the time of about 11, my world kind of changed. And I went from kind of a stable household to kind of one of more uncertainty. And that then led me to spending more time kind of doing the search and rescue, kind of figuring out where I wanted to go there. And then that just kind of led me into becoming a paramedic, a firefighter, and then later an emergency manager.
Okay. Do you have any siblings?
Yes, I have an older brother and a younger brother and a half sister.
Fence or Air Force was that was the goal when you were young.
Yeah, when I was younger, I wanted to be a fighter pilot.
Yeah.
So that was my big dream was to be the first female fighter pilot.
Nice. Doesn't everybody? Everybody wants to be a fighter pilot.
Yeah.
Okay, so were you a good student?
No, not at all. I was very social as a young person, and I cared more about kind of the friendships and hanging out with my friends than I did school. So I was kind of your average C student.
Yeah. Yeah. So what took you into paramedic school? Like, is that something you sort of gravitated towards later on, or was there a moment?
Well, looking back, it seems like it was an obvious thing. But at the time in my 20s, I never thought of it. My mom kept telling me I should become a firefighter, and I thought she was nuts. And then one day I was at a stoplight. I lived in Las Vegas after high school. I was at a stoplight, kind of contemplating my life, figuring out what I should do. And an ambulance came kind of screaming by with lights and sirens. And all of a sudden, I was like, that wouldn't be a bad job because I didn't really want a desk job and I didn't really know what I wanted to do. So I told myself, hey, I'm going to think about it for a little bit. And then that weekend, the Grateful Dead came into town and they were there for 3 shows. And while I was at a show, a lady in front of me she took LSD and she ended up seeing demons and she had a seizure. And so I kind of helped her not hit her head against the metal rail. I didn't know anything about medicine at the time. And then I followed her down with the medics to the medical tent and I watched them work. And I kind of took that as a sign that, the sign I was looking for. So within about 30 days, I had moved back to Colorado and I had enrolled in EMT school. And that's kind of what started it. So Grateful Dead is kind of who saved my life there.
Yeah, one of those serendipitous moments.
Yeah. And I'm probably the only person who can say that too, that the Grateful Dead saved my life.
Absolutely. So over there, it's different compared to here. Here, all our ambulance services are, there are more and more privatized ones, but we all have state-based sort of ambulance. Over there, it's different, isn't it? It's mainly through fire departments.
Yeah, either it's private or it's through fire departments or it's through the government, like city or county would have an ambulance service in some cases.
Okay.
Yeah.
And is there, without starting World War IV over there, is there one better than the other as in like an entry level or an entryway, or does one have, is one a particular entryway to the others?
Well, it was easiest to go through the fire route to get to become an EMT, a working EMT, was to become a volunteer firefighter, kind of work through that. You get some experience and then you go into getting a job. But Yeah, that was the best way that I found to get into the field was become a firefighter.
Okay. And is it on the job type training over there? So you do like obviously some classwork and then you're out on the job, or over here now you need a degree. Um, when I
Yeah,
was, it was on the job type of stuff, an on the job diploma.
yeah, I don't know if they require a degree now. When I got in, they didn't require a degree. You needed to have the EMT certification, and then really you did your clinicals, which was on the job training. And then as a paramedic, you do, your clinicals as well, and you do your field work, and then you do your internship, and you make sure you can pass through that. So, but that was really all that you needed. And then once we were certified, you just had to find a place that you could get employed.
Yep. Yep. So did you enjoy the early stages?
I did. I loved being a paramedic. I really liked being an EMT. I didn't think I was gonna like being a firefighter, but I figured that's the best way to get in, and then I loved being a firefighter. Um, I enjoyed the fact that no day was the same. I liked the uncertainty in the job. And I really liked, working with the patients, the one-on-one. I had to learn the hard way when I became a paramedic to step away. My mentors wouldn't let me touch a patient when I became a paramedic, because they wanted me to see the whole scene and be able to manage the scene instead. So I had a very hard time with that. So they'd have me stand at the door and direct everybody. But once I got used to that, then you get to see kind of how that helps you. It keeps you from getting tunnel vision and everything else. So yeah, I liked all of it. I just didn't, after a while, you deal with enough drunks, you deal with getting beaten up enough. But then after a while, you're like, "Yeah, maybe something else is gonna be good here," but I did enjoy it quite a bit.
Yeah. Yeah. So you were exposed to some violence yourself.
Yeah, I worked up in, Summit County where all the ski resorts are here in Colorado, so, I don't know if you guys have heard of them, but, like, Breckenridge Vale and all that stuff, that's all up kind of where we were at, and so head injuries was a big, injury that we had, and with head injuries, you have people whose personalities change, and a lot of times they wanna kill you for whatever reason, and so we got a lot of patients, either drunk patients who, would get violent, or we would have a head injured patient who is normally a very nice individual, and then their personality just totally changes. So
Yeah.
that's definitely
I
a
always found
hazard
that
of the job.
fascinating with head injuries. I'm I remember one of my biggest learnings early on was a person who was bilingual. They were from Israel and they spoke perfect English and obviously Hebrew. And his partner, who he'd been king hit, and his partner was she was an Australian girl. He was from Israel, but he would only speak in Hebrew. And she said he speaks English without an accent. He is, and he would not. And the police wanted to just put him in the lockup because he had been in a bit of a fight, and then he got king hit. And I said to them, no, he needs to go to hospital. And yeah, he ended up with a big ass brain bleed. And if he went to
Yeah.
if he went to the watch house, he'd probably be dead. And that happened two or three further times down my career where when they're bilingual and they only speak in their native tongue and they cannot understand something that, before this accident or whatever the case would be, they could speak perfect English. It was a major red flag. And,
Oh,
and
absolutely.
you'd meet them later on, lovely people.
Yeah, they're definitely good. And same thing for diabetics, their
Yeah.
whole personality changed too.
Yeah.
And then you just dealt with that. And then when you see them again, they're like the nicest person
Yeah.
you've ever met.
Whereas alcohol for me kind of, if you're an asshole, it makes you a bigger asshole. If you're a nice guy, it just
Yeah.
makes you into you know, a loving, nice guy, cuddly, and all that sort of stuff. I think if you're predisposed to violence, it accentuates that with alcohol.
Yeah,
Whereas
absolutely.
brain injuries change who you are.
Right. Exactly. Yeah, we had a 80-year-old woman, she was probably like, I don't know, 100 pounds at the most, and, she was getting into her car and she fell and hit her head. It was something that simple, and she was totally fine when we got there, and my, partner put her in the back of the ambulance, and I said, "Do you want anybody in the back with you?" And he's like, "Oh, no," and he scoffed at it, and he's like, "Whatever." And so halfway there, she just turned into like uh, a wrestler, and she, like, lunged off the bed, and she started beating him up, and, so he's yelling at me, and I was laughing at him because I gave him the chance to have somebody in the back, and he didn't take me up on it, so
Yeah, we live and learn, don't we? And that's the thing with them with our job as a paramedic. You can't learn it out of a textbook. You've got to
Right.
experience it. You got to build up the database of just shit you didn't think you'd see.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Everything's a learning ground. Yep.
Absolutely, absolutely. What was your what was your best story of being a paramedic? What was your success
Great.
story? Now, that doesn't necessarily mean a good outcome. It means what was your best story as a paramedic?
Well, I guess I have two. One is a short one is a little bit longer, but one was it was a terminal cancer patient, a woman who we were taking her from Summit County down to Denver, which is a 2-hour trip. And all she wanted was to live long enough to see her kids, and so she didn't want any pain medicine. She wanted to remain, you know, cognizant and healthy and be able to understand them when we saw them. And so it was just that trip with her, that 2 hours, knowing that it's kind of her last trip, to go see her kids and just being able to help her with that. I always remember that one call. The best or the worst call and the best call that I had was a, skier at Arapahoe Basin who went off of a jump and he hit a tree midair. And we were called to a femur fracture. And, in a ski industry, femur fractures were a dime a dozen. So it wasn't like anything special. We got there and there was just something about him that told me something else was going on. He was talking to us, he was alert, oriented with everything. But something told me I just needed to move quickly with him. So we had Flight for Life ambulances. So if we can't fly the helicopter, we have an ambulance that can take people with the critical care equipment inside of it.
Yeah.
And so I contacted them and I said, "Hey, I need you to meet me at Keystone," which was the closest clinic to where we were. And they're like, "What's going on? This is a femur fracture." And they're like kind of giving me a hard time. And I said, "Hey, I can't get a blood pressure on him and I just feel like something's wrong." And so we went emergent to Keystone. And by the time I got there, I still couldn't get a blood pressure. So I started a couple lines. I thought he was bleeding into his chest. And so when we got into the clinic staff even was giving me a hard time. They just thought I couldn't get a blood pressure. And so, because he was so alert, he looked good. He didn't look like he was injured at all, didn't have visible injuries. But when they did x-rays of him, he had blood in both of his lungs and he had broken multiple ribs. He ended up losing his spleen, losing a kidney, not losing his spleen, but he had a fractured spleen. He lost a kidney. He ended up having to have the 2 chest tubes. So we were with him for 4 hours on a transport to Denver in a critical care ambulance because it was blizzard
Yeah.
conditions. Um, and so we gave him 8 units of blood and 13 liters of fluid on the way down to Denver. And we had to stop halfway because we ran out of oxygen and we had to trade out oxygen with another ambulance. So it was probably the most complex call that I've ever been on. And then when we got to Denver, they rolled him into what we call T1, which is an or operating room. So you go straight into an operating room from the ambulance, and they opened him up right there. But he did live, and he was highlighted in a magazine, Life magazine, later about people who lived to tell their tale who shouldn't have lived. And so that was a really good call, just because everything went against him. I mean, everything went
Yeah.
against him. He looked fine. He wasn't presenting in any way. There was blizzard conditions, high skier traffic on the way down to Denver. So there was just no reason why he should have lived after everything that happened to him,
Your
but he
gut.
did well,
You
he
trusted
survived
your
it.
gut.
Yeah,
Yeah. And I think that's one of the number one lessons I always had if I ever had students was trust your gut. If you think something wrong, it probably is. And I'd rather
absolutely.
be wrong about trusting it than not trust it and then you're in the shit.
Yeah, and I see that more in emergency services than really any other field. If anybody tells you, "Hey, my gut's telling me something's about to go bad," everybody trusts
Yep.
it because there's just something in our field where we just know that your gut is gonna be telling you the right thing, so you follow
Absolutely.
it.
Yeah, and in regards to your first story, I was fortunate over here where I was part of the team that expanded the Ambulance Wish program to Townsville, where I live. It had already started in Brisbane, and Ambulance Wish is essentially a palliative care service run by volunteers where we take people out on their dying wish while they're in palliation and they can't do it of their normal means. So we took people to a footy game. We've taken people to the beach for the last time or fishing for the last time. We've taken somebody home to have a morning tea where they do a sing-along. It might be to return to country if they're Indigenous, all these beautiful things. And when you do them, it's a real mixture of emotions for everyone involved because you can tell the moment that people realize this is probably the last time this is going to happen. And
Right.
there's gratefulness, there's being mindful and present, and then there's sadness, and there's grief, and there's joy, and it's every roller coaster of emotions. But it was an absolute privilege to do. It's one of the coolest things I've ever been involved with.
Yeah, it's great to be able to just give them that one thing,
Yeah.
if there's nothing
I
else.
mean, we
Yeah.
used to do it definitely informally. If somebody wanted an ice cream on the way to hospital, or I worked in a single officer station, and my offsider once he was going into hospital, and his wife was already in hospital, and it was her birthday. So she stopped and bought a card on the way to hospital. He obviously wasn't emergent or anything like that. That would be kind of weird, but and she
Yeah.
she stopped to the shopping center, nipped into the newsagent, bought a birthday card, and he got to fill out a birthday card and take it and see his wife and give it to him on his birthday, which he wouldn't have been able to do. So lots of
Yeah.
informal thing happens. The problem is, it's just getting too busy to do that stuff.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah.
Workload goes up, and the opportunity to do that sort of thing, you'd get hung now. You just don't have the time. The jobs are just waiting.
Yeah, I do think too that they put too much on you,
Yeah,
so you are just running and running and running, so you can't take the time that you need to take
yeah.
with patients to create good patient care.
Did How did you go mentally while you were a paramedic? Was there any signs of burnout, any signs of trauma, any signs of changes to who you were?
Yeah, I started becoming really cynical. So when I was at that Grateful Dead show, the thing that I remembered the most was that there was no judgment at all, that the paramedics were just trying to get people on their way, trying to get them to enjoy the show, right? So I thought that's the career for me. There's no judgment at all. Well, that's not true. There's really a lot of judgment in the field. And so, because you see the worst of everybody all the time. So it's just like police officers. It's hard not to become cynical. It's hard not to become judgmental of people making bad decisions, like the guy who tries to surf the gondola and then they fall off the gondola and they're wondering how that happened to them.
Yeah,
So I started seeing that in myself. I didn't like how cynical I was becoming, and I didn't like how little I trusted people. So it started to change me. So I really liked the field though, but I really liked the big scenes. And I liked the coordination of multiple entities. And so I really started getting into the emergency management realm, the more of the disaster work, because it's more of that coordination of, and also, after a while, you get tired of being in the field. You're cold. My gloves would freeze to my hands because we lived in the ski resort. And, the drunks obviously, get enough of that and getting beaten up. So I was also looking for kind of that change there, but definitely burnout was part of it.
yeah.
It was starting to change me and I didn't like who I was changing into. So I started to think about where the next step
And
was.
and how long into your career when this kind of this transition sort of process in your head started?
Well, so I was a medic for 10 years. But I had an idea before that emergency management's where I wanted to end up because I joined an incident management team as a paramedic. And here in incident management team, they get called out to kind of run the bigger events. And so I started training as a planning chief within an incident management team. And so I would go out on wildfires and other events and work as a plans chief or work as a paramedic. And I just loved that. Like I loved every part of it. And so I was really going that direction anyway. And then I was at a Crash Test Dummies concert. There's something about concerts in me that changed my career. But I was at a Crash Test Dummies concert and I ran into a friend and I lived in the neighboring county and she said that there was an open position in that county for their first ever emergency manager. And so I applied and it was supposed to be a part-time job, so I figured I was going to continue being a medic, but I'd have this part-time job that I could get into this field. But then when they got to the second interview, they said, "Do you think this is a part-time job or full-time?" And I said, "It's however." I said, "It will be as busy as um, it needs to be. So if you hire me part-time, I'm gonna give you part-time work, but there is full-time work here. You have a lot that needs to be done. So if you hire me full-time, I will be busy." So they ended up hiring me full-time. And so that was kind of a quick shift out of EMS because I couldn't do both jobs. So I stayed on for a little while, a couple of years as kind of a PRN, paramedic, just doing shifts here and
Yeah.
there. But after a while, it was just too much. And so I ended up letting my certification go once I knew that this field was really where I wanted to be.
Yeah, emergency management is definitely something that's evolved over the last sort of 15 years, 20 years.
Oh, yeah.
As part of our state-based ambulance, we have an emergency management section, but we also manage our own local ones as well. I've been my worst experience was probably I was thrust into um, the event commander of Groove in the Moo, which is a big festival we have up here with about 25,000 people, essentially getting off their tits, for a full day. I was thrust into that with 3 days' notice when the existing event commander broke his leg. So I'd never been to a Groove in the Moo. I'd never, you know, been involved with anything like that. And holy crap, that was a wake up call. Um, well over well over 100 bags of fluid, 100 on Danzatron. Most people, their issues were they would because there was dog sniffers and stuff, they would take all the pills they had at one time when they saw the dogs. So
Oh,
they're all taking 7 ecstasy tablets or whatever, and then they're all hypothermic, and tachycardic, and it's just there was a number of women who presented who had lost their tablets, and wanted us to get them out. We're like, no. So, people can use their imagination where they're hiding them. It was an overwhelming, and look, nobody died. There were some very sick people. We took some very sick people to hospital, but it was one of those things that I realized I'm not doing this again unless I am in control of this 100%. And unluckily, they actually lost. They cancelled from then on, and there wasn't any more. COVID hit, and then life came to a standstill when the festivals were concerned. But it was I was part of the Commonwealth Games over here, and part of the event commanders with that, and brilliant learning opportunities. People don't realise that we've got the 32 Olympics in Brisbane. There are dedicated people right now working on that. We
yeah.
don't even have venues sorted out. They don't know whether they're going to build a new venue or anything like that. There are emergency management teams. That's what they're dedicated to, is running the Olympics. The logistics of some of these are just enormous. So when you
Yeah.
did EM, you were just like the fire and paramedic side of things, or did you work alongside police?
No. Yeah, it was at county level.
Like,
So it was for the whole county. So it was really all emergency response, but also everybody at the county, the assessor's office, the building department, all those people are involved too, especially in the recovery. So I was hired in after the largest fire in Colorado's history was in that county. And so they knew that they needed emergency managers. So I came into a recovery where we had mudslides and roads washed away for years after that fire. Yeah, I worked with all of the county departments, but I had to teach them emergency management at the same time because I was the first person, which is actually a good thing because you can build the program from the ground up. And also it's the best way to learn is to learn from, start the foundation and then go up from there. So I enjoyed that immensely. But I like those big events. But as you said, you don't just throw that together. You can't just come in and hope it's all going to work out and that you have a team. You have to be part of that planning. So you know what's in the background, what's happening. And I don't think most people understand how many people are in the background, making sure that everything in that orchestra is working, right? And that everybody has a role. And if everybody's doing their job and knows their role, it'll go well most of the time. And if something goes bad, you'll be able to handle it.
yeah.
But most people don't see any of that. They see the first responders, and they think that if something bad happens, people show up and they take care of it. But really, there should already be the plan in place where you're already ready for whatever's coming.
That's right. The emergency management side is about the planning for the what ifs. And
Yeah,
if a what
exactly.
if comes that you haven't planned for, that's definitely part of the learnings for the next one. Because ultimately, when they have inquiries, if they have coroners courts, if they have legal inquests, things like that, if you haven't planned for it and it's something that you should have been expected to plan for, then you're the one held responsible.
At the beginning of my career, I heard a lot of incident managers or incident commanders say, well, we don't want to have a plan because we don't want to be scrutinized against the plan if we go off the plan. But then it became, if you don't have a plan, you're going to be held liable. So it switched,
Yeah.
fast. So now people understand they got to have a plan, but the plans have to be flexible enough to where you can go off script and go back on script. You can't have something that's so rigid you can't keep up with it, you know?
Yeah. And that's where you need experience that can make on the moment calls and things like that. You can't get into EM, straight out of university or whatever, because
Right.
you just, and my personal opinion is you don't have a clue. You don't know how big the system is. You don't know what's involved. You can't organize paramedics if you've never been a paramedic.
Yeah. And it makes, you know, I think that if you can understand what's happening in the field, that helps you figure out how you can best support the field. But also, people in the field, they learn tools and they learn ways in which to work to keep people safe that then can translate very well into emergency management because now you're looking at a broader scale. But it's those same lessons, though, that you're learning. And you deal with chaos on a regular basis as a paramedic or a firefighter or a police officer, so then when you go to emergency management, it's just chaos at a bigger level,
Yeah.
and with more partners that all have to coordinate together.
Yeah.
So it does help you learn if you have that field experience,
Yeah.
definitely.
Bigger boat, but more captains.
Yeah, exactly.
So when you started in the EM route, did you have any actual formal training in EM? Or I know you said you were interested, but how did you sort of navigate your way through?
So when I got in, there were no degree programs. So I went to Metro State College here in Denver, and they had an individualized degree program. So I went to them and I said, I want a degree in emergency management. So we talked through what would that mean. We set the curriculum, and then they allowed me to take the classes I needed to get the degree. So it was really me creating a degree on my own. But it said it was a degree in emergency management, which helped me because then when I applied in Park County, nobody else had that degree.
I made
And
it up.
so they were like yeah, they're like, "Hey, she has a degree in this thing, so
Yeah.
let's go." So, but really it's just on the job. I learned what the job was. I mean, I knew what it was from being on an incident management team, but I did have to learn on the job in Park County to figure out, what was most important. The one big lesson that I have from that, though, is when I was a brand new emergency manager, I really thought I had to have all the answers to every question. And so I stressed a lot about the fact that I did not know everything I needed to know. And who knows what the next thing is? It could be a school shooting, it could be a wildfire or a flood. Am I going to know enough, to be able to help the community? And I studied later on, I studied chaos theory, and that really freed me because that taught me that we live in an unpredictable world and you can have the best plan in the world, but that plan's going to go off the rails. So, really, what I needed to do is know who are the right people to bring into the room to solve an unknown problem. And as long as I could do that, I didn't have to know everything anymore. So, emergency management to me was very freeing because I was stressed a lot as a paramedic too about, am I going to do the wrong thing for a patient, right? But really, in emergency management, you're dealing with the unknowns all the time. I'm never going to know what's next, and I'm okay with that now. Anything can come our way, and we have the right team in place where they're just going to figure it out and manage,
Yeah.
you know?
Really no different to business. A good businessman surrounds themselves with smarter people.
Exactly. And the most innovative businesses know that they deal with disruption all the time.
Yeah.
And so that's the unknown and the unpredictable. And they have a system where they can move through that.
Yeah.
And I think emergency management needs to go to that model more. We still use in America anyway, we still use a civil defense model from the 1960s and a very hierarchy, top down model where really we're a collaborative network of people.
Yeah.
And so we really have to change our system in order to meet the needs of the disruptions that we're gonna see in the future, you know?
Yeah. Yeah. As is quite different, as is, we have local, so our government structure over here is we have the federal government, state governments, and councils. Each council has their local disaster management group, and that will be all of the agencies similar to what you're talking about, what you do. And they're made up of people that are officers in charge of stations or senior operations supervisors, that type of thing. And then those LDMGs, those locals, they sit into a district disaster management group, which is a bigger, like maybe consists of 4 or 5 LDMGs, and then that feeds into the state coordination or disaster group. So it's still that command and control structure where it's across and down. So
Right.
people still know what their responsibilities are, but it's it doesn't feel like that when you're on the ground, because ultimately when you're a paramedic in a disaster, you're still doing the same job.
Right. Yeah,
And that's
exactly.
and that's the most healthy thing to do, because otherwise it's overwhelming. If obviously triage is different if you're on a scene at a mass cas, that's a different beast. But if you're in a flooding event or in a fire zone or anything like that, then it's just a command and control structure. Most of the time as a paramedic, you're there mainly just in case. Might have
Right.
multiple posts around the fire, depending on the size of the fire. And we get some damn big fires here, same as you guys over there. And they take some coordinating where anywhere in this country at one stage, we could be having floods, cyclones, fires, you name it, it's happening. We've got every extreme in this country, even within each state, so I think the big thing is after every event, be it little or big, is the post analysis is absolutely critical for the people involved in that emergency management level to just see what could go better or what can we prepare for next time. But the height of arrogance is thinking everything went right.
Yes, exactly. Yeah, I was actually getting a briefing from a high level executive from the ATF, Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearms Federal Agency. And he was talking about a major incident that occurred, a very um, well known incident. And I asked him, I said, so what would you do different if you had it to all to do over again? Because this incident did not go well at all. And he goes, actually, I think we do everything the same. And I kind of gave him a look and he waited until the break and he came up to me and he said, so I saw your look. So talk to me about that. And I said, you're telling me that that incident there, the one that went really bad, there's not a single thing you could have done different. And he's like, yeah, maybe I should have, talked more about that. I'm like, yeah, the fact that you didn't learn a single lesson tells me everything I need
Yeah.
to know
Yeah.
about who you are.
Yeah. What's the definition of stupidity? Doing the same thing over again and expecting a different result.
Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely. But also I do think like the after action review, which is what you're talking about, is so important. But also we do that as the incident is moving through, we do what if analysis. So we have a group, we call them a consequence management unit. Their whole job is just to say, what if this tower goes down? Or what if the fire passes this road and we got to deal with this? Or, so they help us to kind of stay ahead instead of being in this reactive mode so that we can start already solving those problems. So if it does become a problem, we're like, that's not an issue anymore because we already solved it over here.
Yeah.
So that I think is just as important as that after learning is learning as you go. During COVID, we had the largest wildfire we've had in the state. It was in our county, the county that I'm the emergency manager for. But before that fire, we're dealing with COVID. And I was at a briefing and I said, our worst case scenario event is a large wildfire in the middle of this pandemic because we're bringing thousands of people in. We're not going to get the same amount of people. They're not going to be able to congregate the way that they normally do.
Ask
We
and
can't
you
have them
shall
fighting
receive.
fire. Exactly. But because I said that though, we had a group of people who started working that problem. They said, "Okay, how does the pandemic change how you do wildfire?" And so when we had the wildfire, we were ready for it. But yeah, people give me a hard time all the time because I'm like, "Well, what if this happens?" And then it happens. They're like, "You need to stop saying that."
How are you individually when you see bad shit go down somewhere else? On a news report or something, a concert, a rush, or a collapse, this, that, and the other. I don't. I'm personally, I put myself right there. I can't help it. I hate it, but it's what would I do?
Oh, absolutely. And also, we always get their reports afterward and we see what the reports say and what can we learn from that? How do we change our system to make it better from that incident so that we don't have the same thing happen? I don't want to be the person who's like, oh, they so messed up on this, and that. In some cases, that's inevitable, but that doesn't teach us anything. Really, we have to say, if this incident happened here, would we be facing the same thing, or do we have the systems in place that could handle that?
Yeah.
And that's where we learn from it.
That's one of my biggest bugbears at a state level is that I've often asked for, let's say, for example, we had a balcony collapse many years ago, and there was a party, and there was about 30 people on this in this balcony in a very sort of high affluence society area, and a balcony collapsed. 30 people got injured. It was a multi-cas, and it was a big deal. I do believe a couple of people died. Um, but they don't disseminate after action reports to the staff because I think they're scared of almost admitting something went wrong.
Yeah.
But you learn from as a paramedic on the ground, you learn more from reading that to go, okay, this is something that we can do different, or shit, I didn't even think about that happening, or that restriction. Because especially when you're new, the average paramedic now over here is less than 2 years into their job. The life expectancy of a paramedic in their job now is 5 years. When I started, you were careers.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah, that's
so
true.
you need people you need to be able to learn from other people's mistakes without that criticism, that personal attack and stuff like that. But as a system, we need to learn. But to do that, you've got to share information, and that could leave
Yeah,
you
exactly.
vulnerable. But you learn more from mistakes. It's one of those things. If you don't hear anything, you've got to presume everything went well, and most of the time, that's a load of crap.
Right. I was on a big incident here in Colorado. It was a shooting, a mass casualty shooting. And I at the time I worked for the state, so I worked with a lot of the local jurisdictions. So it was in their jurisdiction. I went and I helped them. But afterward they asked me to facilitate the after action, facilitate the conversation between law enforcement, paramedics, and everybody that was on scene about lessons learned. And when they told me that, they said, but don't bring up this one topic, right? Don't bring this thing up because it's the big elephant in the room and it's really gonna fire people up. And I said, "Well, that's exactly what we need to talk about."
Yeah,
Because if it's the thing, then it's the thing that failed. And if you don't fix it now, it's just gonna keep being a problem.
absolutely. And if as somebody who's on the ground, if something went wrong and nothing's learned from that, you don't move past it.
No.
You hold on to those little demons and they chip away inside of you. If you've made a mistake or if you've learned something simply because you haven't seen it before and you had to make it up as you went along, which is a lot of what happens,
Right.
you if you don't have the opportunity to grow from that, then yeah, it'll just keep chipping away.
Yeah, that's one of the biggest lessons from being a medic is it's the first time I had ever been in a place where they would train you to fail on a regular basis. So, in your exams, they'd have you have a patient and the patient always went off the rails no matter what you did. And so, you had to kind of learn and figure things out as you went. But I also got okay with failure, and okay with learning, okay, that treatment's not working. Let's try this other thing here. But I don't think most, organizations allow for failure. They don't even allow for failure in exercises.
Yeah,
And so we really push that here where if we're not exercising the failure, we're exercising the wrong
yeah.
things. Because we want to figure out what that point is where we don't have a system or something that's going to work. But I still think that fear of failure is one of the biggest things in our field that is going to become a problem, down the
I
line.
agree. I agree. I know when I went through and it was a diploma, we used to do what we call a panel, which is where we'd go away, we'd stay at like a Boy Scout camp for 5 days and we'd just get hammered with scenarios. And one of the scenarios, um, you would you would get presented with it and the patient would arrest and you would do CPR and you were thinking, shit, what have I missed? What have I missed? They want to know if you're ready to call it. That was
Right.
the test. Are you ready to say this patient is deceased and you're ready to apply the discontinuation criteria and say that they're dead? Because otherwise you'll
Yeah.
be
I've
there for
done
three
everything I
hours.
can possibly do.
That patient was
Yeah.
always going to die. That was the test. It didn't matter what you
Exactly.
did. He was going to die or she was going to die. So, and you'd have to expect it. I mean, how many in your career, how many cardiac arrests have you had that you remember that have walked out of hospital?
I only know of two
Yeah.
my entire career
Yeah.
that went from dead to being alive.
Yeah. Yeah, I think I was lucky. I had maybe 6. There's other people that have had 20, and there's other people that have had none in a 20-year career. People think, and that's just luck. We
Yeah.
all do the same stuff for the same patients. Whether or not that's going to make a difference that's up to powers higher than us.
Right. Yeah, both of mine were codes in the clinic where they were shocked within about a minute.
Yeah.
So you had everything going for them in those
My
cases.
favorite one, which I think I would have mentioned in maybe episode 1 when I did a solo one. We were called to a patient who was short of breath, and when we arrived, he was unconscious, and a GP who lived nearby came back and said, "Don't worry about it, he's dead." And, oh, okay, we didn't even know we were coming to a cardiac arrest. And he looked fairly young. Turns out he was like mid-40s, early 40s. And we went over to him. We're having this conversation, and we said, "Oh, well, should we put the pads on?" And general discontinuation criteria for rapid discontinuation. Spin it out. Rapid discontinuation criteria for us is if they haven't had CPR for 10 minutes and there's no signs of life, then you don't even have to start. But he
Right.
just looked young. We said, well, how about we put the pads on or put the dots on and we'll see if he's got anything and go from there. And he had a very, very fine VF. We're like, so we kind
Just
of
enough.
looked at each other and went, okay, right, well, let's give it a go. And so he was about 12 minutes before we started anything, from call received to before we started anything. And then I think it was 36 minutes, many shots, lots of adrenaline, and we got Ross. And we kind of looked at each other. There was a team of us there, and we were like, oh, shit, what have we done? Oh, maybe he can be an organ donor. So we took him to hospital anyway, and they went straight up to the cath lab, and we just presumed that he would be an organ donor. And then about a week later, we were in the same hospital because there's about 7 hospitals in the area. And we were at a nurse's station doing a transfer. And we said, oh, we're just chasing up a patient from last week. We just wanted to see how he went. And his name's Bob Smith. And then all we heard from directly behind us, I'm Bob Smith. And we stood up
Oh,
and he
wow.
was standing in the doorway and he was there and he was fine. And we're like, and he goes, I heard I was crook. I said, mate, you weren't crook, you were dead. Like, did you see
Yeah.
any lights? Do you remember anything? He goes, no, don't remember a thing. He goes, I woke up in hospital. I've got, we broke almost every rib he's got. He was bruised from left, top to bottom. He had a big bruise on all his thigh where they did the rapid angio. And he was getting discharged the next day to go to his son's wedding.
Wow.
So he was
that's awesome.
48 minutes without his own pulse. Again, that's
Yeah.
not our skill. That's just, he wasn't ready to go.
Exactly.
You know,
Yeah.
and
There's some people that beat all the odds.
absolutely. And others that you're like, no, they'll be fine. And you go in and you finish your paperwork, you're handing it into the cube and they're doing CPR on the patient. It's like, what the hell did you do?
Yeah.
You might
Exactly.
not
They were
know.
fine when I have it.
All right. So going back to the EM, so you got your own degree, you designed your own degree, and you got that.
Yeah.
Did you have any feedback into ongoing education as far as EM is concerned?
Well, yeah, we have FEMA here, and there's a ton of FEMA classes, the Federal Emergency Management Agency. So really, that's where everybody kind of starts, as they start going through those FEMA classes. But mainly for me, it was learning as I went, learning from the people that I was working with, learning about the incidents that we had, and building a program that was best for our community. So I don't think, like, if I designed a program now, I would not have people take FEMA classes. I would have them take classes on mediation, facilitation, problem solving, project management. Those are the things that emergency managers do the most. The rest of it is a byproduct, I guess. But it's not really what we need to be trained on. That stuff's going to happen. But if you have good project management skills and you can deal with a little bit of chaos without freaking out, then I think that you have the right personality to be able to just get in a room and be like, we can figure this out. We're gonna be okay.
Yep. And if we can't, we'll get somebody smarter than that, and they can put in their 2 cents. What do you reckon about AI
With regard to what?
to EM? I think it has a huge
Oh,
role to play in the future for
yeah.
simulations and that type of thing.
Yeah, so I have mostly millennials in my staff and Gen Z. And so I'm a Generation X, and so for me, technology doesn't come easy to me. And but I have people on my staff who are all over it. So we were in a staff meeting and I'm very wary of AI because I have a degree in terrorism. So I see that side, like the bad
Yep.
actor. And so I'm wary of how it will be used from, in an adverse way. But anyway, we're in this meeting and I told my staff, hey, you know what I'm going to do? After this meeting, I'm going to create a crosswalk between these emergency support functions and lifelines. And then I'll show that to you guys. And one of my staff members, in the 5 minutes I was talking, he did it with AI
Yeah.
and he showed it to me. And I was like, okay, so there's some good stuff about AI. One last thing
Absolutely.
I gotta do.
Absolutely. It is an amazing, and I know very little about it. I've seen as examples of it. I've got a friend who's a teacher, and it writes most of the syllabus, and then it cross checks his lesson plan over the, grades it and things like that. So it can do amazing things when you understand it. Absolutely, it's got some negatives, and it's got some scary times. And I think whoever controls AI is, yeah, they're going to be a dangerous person, or like a entity, probably more like. Um, and anyone who thinks AI isn't controlled, data has to be inputted.
Right. Well, it's just like anything. Anything can be weaponized.
Absolutely.
So really it's about setting the ethics around how you use it, but then also you just need to know that it's a tool in the toolbox, but it's not everything, right? So I was in a meeting with a bunch of big brains from the National Science Foundation, and they were all working together on a proposal for a grant. And they were asked. I was the only practitioner in the room, and so they asked me, if there was one tool to rule them all, kind of like the Lord of the Rings thing, what would that tool be? And so I was thinking about it in that meeting, and by the time it came up to me speaking, I said I have a tool that would rule them all, and I said, if you guys could create, because right now my biggest problem is I'm not a hydrologist, I'm not an engineer. And so when I have these complex problems of debris dams coming down a creek bed that could cause a landslide or a mudslide, and I need to know the degree of risk within that basin, whatever it is, right now, I can have all the data in the world and it means
Yeah.
nothing to me until I have others who analyze
Yeah.
that data.
Yeah.
So I said, you teach AI hydrology and you teach AI the engineering. And that way I can ask any specific question that I want. We give them good data. So you don't just use public data that could be trash. You give them good data and you say, okay, what's the risk of this becoming a mudslide with the debris dams that we currently have on
Yeah.
this basin? And it's able to analyze that risk. And they said, we could do that right now. And I said, you bring that tool to me, I'll pay for that tool because it solves a very specific problem on whatever I need. I can ask the question
Yeah.
and it's with good data. And so they were so excited about that. They're like, if we could tap into AI for that specific thing and teach it along the way, the hydrology and everything else, it could be a valuable tool for, whatever an emergency manager needs.
Absolutely. I mean, and that's the thing. Most of these, all of these predictive things, they're just data insets. So if you
Yes.
give them enough data, they can just AI can just process it at a rate that we can't fathom, but it can give you 3D modeling. It can give you things, and I haven't seen this, but I know it's available. So exactly. If this dam, if it gets to this amount and this burst, but it's still raining, that will change things, and they're all the inputs, and you can get 100 different variations of depending on what inputs you put in, and it's real time.
Yeah.
They can give it to you, and that's where I think, yeah, and it can be as far as your building collapses, your floods, your hurricanes. I think and we'll talk about the hurricanes soon. But all the meteorology, you'd have to think meteorologists are very threatened as a species because it's a data input. Meteorology is about it's computer and data input.
Oh, yeah, it's models,
Yeah,
and anybody could do those
yeah,
models, and they just have to try to interpret it. And AI, the thing about it is it learns from the past. So it's constantly learning. So it's like having somebody in the room who's gone through 1,000 different events
yeah,
and they've learned over time. AI is doing that in seconds. Like when I was in that meeting, they said AI right now is at 80%. So we could get an 80% solution and then teach it the rest of the way.
yeah.
And so
Look,
again, it has great potential, but it could also be very bad.
absolutely. It's yeah, I think it's exponential, and we're at the very bottom of the up curve where it starts to just go nuts. And
Oh, yeah,
I
like
think life in 10 years and 20 years is completely different to what we are right now.
the fake videos that we're seeing
Oh,
and the fake voicemails where
yeah,
we had a meeting with our commissioners where the IT director played a voicemail in his voice that wasn't him.
yep,
It was computer generated AI that created a voicemail. He never said it.
yep.
So you don't know who you're talking to. You don't know if the video is real. So again, all those safeguards have to be put into
So
place
the
so that we're
software
good
that
to
I'm
go.
using now to record this, it learns yours and my voices, and it comes up with a transcription, and I can edit our conversation by putting words in, and it will voice those words in our voices.
Wow.
You know,
That's scary.
it is, it's scary. And the line between what's true and what's not, or who's real and who's not, is going to become more and more blurry. I don't know how you stop it. It has to be legislative, I think.
Yeah.
But yeah, the hard part is the it's going to get so good for the common person that we won't know the difference at the time.
Right. And it's coming so fast that they're already behind the ball. I mean, it's already moving so
Yeah,
quickly. So
absolutely, absolutely. So, what's your biggest sort of learning as an emergency manager? Or so you got your master's, didn't you?
I have 2 master's degrees. So one is in public administration, and then the other one is in defense studies with a emphasis in homeland security. So that's the terrorism side.
Okay. So was that part of your emergency management, or you just that's something you got interested in, sort of into that, like as a result of that?
Well, the public administration was because it took me 13 years to get a bachelor's degree, and I just wanted to move straight into my master's and get it done with because I was being held back in some jobs because I didn't have a
Yeah.
degree. So I just went through that. I got public administration because really that's what we do as well. I work in the public sector. I think I always will work as a public servant. So I did that, and then a few years later, or several years later, there's a program called the Center for Homeland Defense and Security, and it's for emergency managers, and it's for security professionals, but it's at the Naval Postgraduate School, and it's a free program. If you get in, it's a free master's. So it's taught by people who are in our field. It's about our field. And it really gave me a lens into terrorism that I never really knew about because I really deal mostly with the natural disasters, but it was really good for me to see this human side
Yep.
of disaster as well and to see how that's managed differently. We had speakers, like I said, we had TSA come and talked about how they decided on 3 ounces for the bottles on an
Yep.
airplane and why, and they showed us the videos of what they went through, so that was interesting. We had people who were in some major incidents that we've had, 9/11 or whatever else, come and give us briefings about why they made the decisions that they made. So it was just an excellent program, but that's also the program that introduced me to chaos theory and complexity theory,
Yep.
and that changed everything for me. It completely changed how I work as an emergency manager. It changed how our program was developed. We don't have hazard specific plans at all in our county. Everything is based upon process because it doesn't matter if it's a flood, fire, hurricane, or zombie apocalypse. If I know how to do public information management or resource management, I know how to get what I need for whatever the threat
Yep.
is. But that's a very different mindset than most places in America where everything is hazard driven, where you have your flood plan, you have your fire plan.
Yep.
We don't do that in Larimer County anymore just because of the complexity theory. We're working in unknowns. Fires cause floods, then they cause mudslides. Which one of those are we going to be in? We could be in all three all at one time.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh, that's cool. Okay. Well, what we'll do is we're going to wrap up this episode. We're going to keep going and we're going to make this as a part 2. So thanks, everyone. If you've got any questions, please email me at beyondthecallpeter@gmail.com or contact me via the Facebook page. And yeah, come back for part 2.
Thanks for listening to this episode of Beyond the Call. If you like what we're about, please make sure you subscribe, and if you can leave a review, that would be appreciated. If you have feedback or suggestions for future guests, please contact me via my socials. Please share with your networks and help me expand my reach. It's a great privilege for people to share their stories and allow us to go beyond the call.